Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. We've had a little bit of technical difficulties, but if there's anyone good who can roll with the flow on this, it is Austin. My name is Naomi. I am the chair of trīb USA Central. We are talking with Austin Brown today about innovation, and this is our next installment of the Master Your Mind series. Currently, Austin is the only person at US Cellular who is solely focused on innovation. He is a one-man team doing a lot of different things. But it's really cool. It gives them an opportunity to really explore different ideas and be part of different groups. But first, Austin, when I was asking you for your bio for this, I realized that innovation has not been your sole career. You've had a lot of different roles. So do you mind telling us kind of how you got to where you are?
Sure. Yeah, kind of a very odd background that has fortuitously got me to where I am. I would imagine that as some of you can appreciate, the title of innovation, I would say, is fairly new in the modern business world. At least when I went to school for business, there was no innovation course. There was no, I want to be an innovation person. And so I would say, fortunately, my career path stumbled into it. Out of college, well, I guess college I did finance, so I was kind of always familiar with the business domain, but out of college, I was a partner at a startup for a few years. And so kind of got my first foray into the kind of new business creation field. And then had an opportunity to move to Chicago for a role at the Chicago Tribune, hey Maribel. And also had a few opportunities to kind of jump around into fun different roles, but always being on somewhat of the forward-looking side of the business. And then eventually worked my way into more of a corporate development role, which means various things for different companies. But my job was looking at new business models, new startups, new technologies to help the Chicago Tribune evolve itself and become a more innovative company. And then fortunately, I knew a few folks at the US Cellular innovation team and landed here about 3.5 years ago. So yeah, it's been a varying ride. And I would imagine anyone who has the title innovation in their role has not started in innovation. They have had multiple roles and they have eventually landed there.
Very true, very true. So when you hear the word innovation, what does it mean to you? I mean, it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So in terms of what you think innovation, what do you think?
Yeah, it's probably the best question, especially nowadays when people are talking about what is innovation and how do we move innovation forward. And you hear a lot of companies say, we want to be innovative, which is obviously a reasonable ambition to have. But I think it does start with understanding and clearly grasping what it means within a company. And innovation can mean different things to different people, to different companies, to different cultures. And so at US Cellular, I've been trying to do my best to try and bring some common definition or uncover a definition by teams within the organization, because perhaps I shouldn't define it. Perhaps I should adopt to whatever everyone else thinks innovation is. But to take a step back, how I characterize innovation is that it is absolutely a mindset. It is a process and it is an outcome. And so across those three dimensions, you can talk about an innovation in multiple ways. And so do you have an innovative mindset? Do you believe that innovation and kind of creating new things is possible? It's a process. So how do you go from an idea to launching and growing a business that doesn't exist today? And then finally, it's an outcome, which is like, we have launched something that is unexpected into the market and people wanted it, because it wouldn't be innovative if people don't buy it. Otherwise, it would just be creativity. So there's quite a bit of talk around how do you use the word innovation within your organization. Typically, I try to use it in those kind of three domains. And really then when you go deeper into each of those, you could then interpret innovation means different things to different people. But usually I position it as the creation of new things that don't exist in market today, and the adoption or the purchase of those new things, either products or services or processes, whatever that might be, even internally.
Okay. When I was talking to Austin about joining this, he started talking about, innovation, how it looks different at different companies. do you want to go into that? Because you're talking about like Google versus us, maybe versus a different company. And it was just interesting to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so there's, again, to maybe take a step back, I'm currently doing innovation within a telecom company, and our version of innovation may look totally different than another company's version of innovation. And so I absolutely will, reference, the big, most innovative companies that people typically assume are innovative, i.e. Google or Apple or whomever in that space. And it is absolutely just a part of their culture and a part of how they operate. And so their capability of driving new products and services into the industry is kind of a part of their process. And so, I then look at, US Cellular and try to essentially say, okay, what is our company, our culture, our context, our industry allowing us to do innovatively? And, there's obviously variances in the type of industry that you're in that allow you to be perhaps innovative in the product sense, or perhaps you need to be innovative in the service sense. But there's obviously a spectrum of what type of innovation there is. And then, we could obviously dig deeper into how do each of those companies do innovation. But, being a small team, we are very much a centralized version of how do we, support innovation activities in the company. Because just because my title has innovation does not mean I'm the only person doing innovation. We have a fantastic forward-thinking R&D and engineering group that are looking ahead at how can we deliver a service that doesn't exist today in market. And you can also look at innovation as a, kind of a mindset that is infused in different teams throughout organizations. So I hope that makes sense. I mean, there's obviously a lot to unpack with the discrepancy of innovation. The one thing that I do take a step back and laugh about is that I started in a startup environment, and really there was no choice but to do innovation. Like, innovation is a responsibility of everyone because you're in survival mode, right? Like, you're trying to build a business that hadn't existed before. And so, applying the same types of principles into a larger corporation, but the difference is the fact that a larger corporation typically has a product or service that already exists in market. It's already working, customers already buy it, and so there's less uncertainty around their core business. Whereas if you're in a startup environment, your every day is uncertain, and so you probably won't find anyone with the title innovation within a startup, because it will be everyone's job.
Definitely. Well, that makes a lot of sense. And right now, you're kind of the one-man show. When I joined the marketing group, it was a two-man show. But I understand prior, it was a much larger group. And so what is that dynamic like? I mean, right now it's just you. Before that, I understand it was a significantly larger group. And so how is your role then compared to what you're doing now?
So I would imagine most people here have gone through some organizational change at some point or another. And obviously, I don't know about you, but for me, it feels like, changes are happening faster and faster. And so when I arrived at US Cellular about 3.5 years ago, like Naomi said, the team was a lot larger. And the team was focused on one form of driving innovation for the organization. Handful of months later, there was a refocus on how we would do that moving forward. And so fundamentally, kind of my day-to-day shifted priority. And that's like, I would say I'm accustomed to rolling with things, but I would imagine everyone is increasingly accustomed to rolling with things. And so, my day job is very different in the sense that I'm trying to ensure that innovation isn't only within my job description, that it is a part of our organization. And so not only am I doing kind of projects to help teams, and maybe this is a good time to describe what I actually do. It's like, Austin, what is innovation? What do you actually do every day?
I mean, I really don't know what you do all day. Not a clue.
Oftentimes I don't either, but no, a lot of what I do every day is to try and help individuals and teams work through their biggest uncertain opportunities. And so I most fittingly describe it as an internal consultant. And so that means that I could either jump into a project and help teams on a very small basis, or I can be a lead on a project that spans over several months, which is, typically taking on something that perhaps the organization doesn't have a point person to run with. And so I can fit into that mold as needed. But really my day-to-day is to help a lot of different teams and a lot of different businesses tackle their big uncertain challenges. So to answer your question, Naomi, more directly, my day job, it really does cross over between working with teams and doing innovation work in projects to help deliver new uncertain spaces. At the same time, I try to switch hats to where kind of the more the processes, the incentives, the pathways, the opportunities for more teams and more individuals throughout the organization to be innovative in their own roles and their own jobs and their own responsibilities. And so I try to think about my role on both, hats and try to balance my time to reflect the priority of the organization. So it could be, meeting with leadership and talking about where we're going and how do we use innovation to get there. Or it could be, working with the team on a very, very specific project and helping facilitate them through a various set of innovation methodologies to help them achieve their goals.
Do you mind giving us an example of maybe a past project so that people can see what that might look like, maybe the one we were on?
Yeah. So a very good example is a team member, perhaps a business unit lead, would come to me and say, "Hey, Austin, we are challenged with solving this problem within our day job," i.e. an example would be that the way we're doing business today isn't quite as effective as we need it to be. How might we rethink the way we do business in our day-to-day? And so that's where I try to then go deep into questioning mode. And so my job at the very beginning is to really deeply understand what is the problem you're trying to solve. Because oftentimes everyone wants to think of new ideas and everyone wants to do a brainstorm. But I always try to challenge the group to make sure that we're starting off on the right foot. And so that any brainstorm, any ideation activity is solely focused on the specific challenge that we're trying to solve. And so oftentimes it will go round and round to make sure that we're solving the right problem before we actually move forward with anything, which turns out to be somewhat therapeutic for teams if I'm getting too much into their business. But one challenge that was presented several months back was this opportunity to rethink how this team did their work. And so we went through this exercise and we landed on, okay, here's how we want to solve this problem, or here's the space, the sandbox that we want to solve this problem. And so I helped the team. I led this cross-functional group effort to go deep into problem understanding. And most often the problem understanding is deep immersion into understanding your customer. And that's like fundamental for anything innovation related, is deep customer understanding, whether that's your internal customer or an external customer. Making sure that you really understand what are their pain points, what are their aspirations, what is important to them, what are their unmet needs. And then you go into an ideation session, you go into that creative mode where you're trying to come up with varying solutions to solving that problem. Then my typical approach is to narrow down and converge on what are the most appropriate or most opportunistic solutions that we identified as a group, and then try to identify what are the biggest risks and assumptions within those solutions, and then do our best to systematically de-risk and experiment our way to validating that solution actually meets the hypothesized unmet need in the marketplace. So I'll try and say that simply. We try to take a problem, deeply understand it, create a range of solutions that help us test if we're on the right path, and then we experiment our way with consumers to increasingly validate and increasingly succeed in our day job, versus relying on a single bet or a single shot at the very beginning of a problem and going, out to market, if you will, or launching something without having as much certainty. So my job is then to facilitate the group through that process. And so that's what I mentioned earlier, is that there is a system of how we try to de-risk or how we try to explore uncertain spaces.
I got to tell you guys, when Austin and I happened to be on a project together, I was sort of put on it to help with kind of the management around scheduling and everything, but then I was an active participant as well, and it was fascinating because we went through all of those steps he talked about. We partnered with it, also with an external innovation vendor, and we really began by hypothesizing, who are our customers? What do they look like? What do they do? What are their jobs? Do they have kids? It just coming up with mock models of that. We found pictures on the internet of like what we think this person could look like, and we went all the way through to testing our ideas, setting up calls with customers, and showing them our ideas and getting their inputs on them. It was a fascinating process from start to finish. And now that group that actually had that, hey Austin, we need help thing, is now taking those learnings and applying them to what they're doing. It was truly interesting to just be part of, as a person who had no idea what this other group did in the first place and really didn't know what Austin did, and I just was kind of along for this fun ride. And it was very interesting to work with Austin. So you were talking once about the art and science of innovation, that those are two different things, and it's important to understand the difference. Yeah,
I think it's probably with any job. I probably just am most familiar with my job. There's an art and science of anything. And I absolutely believe that there are increasing amounts of science kind of approaches to innovation. And there's tons of literature out there, tons of thought leadership out there, tons of books, tons of classes that are creating increasing amounts of knowledge around the space of innovation. So the science of innovation is growing, and how I see the science side is very much the process. How do you determine what is a big assumption? How do you understand a problem deeply? How do you uncover pain points with customers? How do you validate a solution, a creative solution in market? How do you approach that with as low cost as possible, as quickly as possible? All of those things are kind of following a system and following a process. And so it doesn't have to be like this behind closed doors, they just go do innovation, right? There is a way to kind of, demystify the approach to innovation. And that's what Naomi was saying, is that, she didn't have exposure into this, but by creating the system that makes it available to everyone is a really helpful way to show that there is a method to the madness, and that there is a bit of science to innovation. Now, the other side, in the art of innovation, is where I think that there is a ton of thoughts about, but it really does come down to relationships, empathy, the soft skills that allow you to perhaps maintain your curiosity and maintain your discipline towards solving the right problem, because it gets really tempting to just chase shiny objects. So the art of doing innovation in my book is developing those other skills that allow you to maintain kind of your way of doing the science appropriately. And then on top of that, if you're kind of in an innovation role, I think there's layers and layers of art when it comes to building innovation and trying to advocate innovation within an organization. And I would imagine anyone that knows me from US Cellular would agree that I'm patiently persistent, but it requires quite a bit of art when it comes to developing any new competency within an organization, because most large organizations have not had to do innovation until they feel like their current business model isn't going to be sufficient in 5-10 years out. And so that's why they say, hey, we need to drive innovation. We need to have a growth path forward. And so the art of doing innovation within an organization is a whole nother bucket. But when I talk about the art and science, I do believe there is a structure and a system and a process that makes innovation possible for anyone. And that's kind of how I present it.
Okay, so you're saying there's always a system and a process, but do you ever get stuck?
Always.
And what do you do then? Okay, you know this process, you know this system, you're gonna try really hard not to chase the shiny glitter filled objects and the disco balls, but what do you do then when you hit that point where I don't know where to go from here?
So I don't know if I developed it or if I always had it, but I believe that any problem can at least develop a point of view around. And I would treat every single innovation effort where there is a sticking point, if you will, I would then treat that as a problem to be solved. And so then I would diagnose and try to take a step back and say, okay, what is the issue at hand? I typically find that most problems work themselves out through iteration. And so what do I mean by that is that a lot of times people try once and it doesn't work and then they move on or they give up. I believe that if you try through action to iterate your way to success, you will be in a way better place. And I read this in a book. There was this kind of story around a photography teacher in high school who graded two sets of students. One set with, your final picture at the end of the semester or whatever, we're grading you off of that one picture. The other students were graded off of how many pictures they took. And unsurprisingly, the students that took quantity amount of pictures actually had way better pictures than the students who tried their best to do one picture at the end of the semester. And that to me shows the point that iteration is such an important part of innovation, because you will learn in micro kind of capacities where the problem is actually a lot smaller. It's actually not as big as you think. So try something, learn, iterate, try something, learn, iterate, try something, learn, iterate.
Okay. I like that. I like that. There's always a solution. You just have to keep iterating. So, and I'm going to paraphrase here because I'm never going to exactly say our mutual boss's Cortland's words right, but we were in a very large meeting. It was one of my first marketing meetings, and she goes, I love the innovation dudes because they're comfortable asking the uncomfortable questions. And Austin was like kind of in the back and in the corner, and you hear him pipe up, and he goes, I'm never actually comfortable. So how do you, you're in that uncomfortable zone then of like, being in the space. How do you navigate around that? Do you ever get into this place where it feels good, or are you just learning to manage that space?
Yeah, I think both, honestly. I've always kind of had just a natural curiosity towards anything at hand. And I think I've been very fortunate over the past handful of years to have been in roles where it's kind of encouraged to be curious. And it is encouraged to, or I shouldn't say my role is encouraged. I would say that my title is more encouraging of my curiosity. I would say everyone has an opportunity to be curious. It's not my title versus anybody else's title, but I would say it's more expected of me to be curious.
Well, yeah, if you're called the innovation manager, yeah.
Yeah. So I would say just that point is that I find, my curiosity is running in any meeting, in any situation, in any conversation. And oftentimes I have to ensure that, okay, is it appropriate for me to ask a question right now? Because sometimes it can derail a conversation. But most oftenly, I find that it is helpful. And especially if you are coming to the table with genuine, authentic interest and curiosity. Because at the end of the day, I'm invested and interested in seeing our team, our company, our people succeed. And so if I'm coming with that level of intentionality and I'm asking a question that is coming with my set of facts, perhaps I don't know all the facts, but I have to come to the table with, here's what I know. Can someone help me understand this? Can you clarify this? Can you expand on that? Asking questions that allow someone to perhaps open, the deeper responses is always, it seems to be helpful in my opinion. But yes, it is uncomfortable at times when I'm in the room with 80 other people raising my hand, which could come across as why is Austin being a troublemaker? And I have to be conscious that I am thoughtful about those questions and also trying to ensure that the answer is potentially productive for everyone in the room. Because I don't want to be selfish with my question to answer what I'm thinking. I want to try to answer or ask the question that might perhaps help other people in the room as well.
Definitely. No, that makes a lot of sense. So on this call, and is a lot of administrative professionals, it's what the tribe is. And you said you saw a lot of synergy between the work that you do and the work that we do. And I could say what you said, but you're going to say it way more eloquently than I ever could.
Yeah, so to take a step back, when Naomi asked me, like, would you want to come and, participate in this? I was like, oh my God, yes, I'm so in. Because, love Naomi, but I see so many parallels in kind of my day job. And I then empathize for the challenge that Naomi faces every day, because there are so many times when I am asked to perhaps work on or explore a problem that doesn't have a solution. And there is so much of that happening in your day to day where it is I don't know the solution to this problem. There is uncertainty in what I have to do. And so you are, and as am I, a person who just says, great, I'll figure it out. I don't know how yet, but I will do my best to figure it out. And so, I absolutely think that not only your work, but increasingly everyone's job has some capacity of uncertainty. And I think that that's where I try to ensure that perhaps innovation principles don't just stay within innovation. They should be shared. They should be brought to everyone, because it's not just a matter of like, do you do this or do I do that? I think that everyone is increasingly needing to be equipped with the skill set of identifying and working through uncertainty. And I think that that is absolutely a part of your day-to-day. And I'm grateful for your willingness to work through uncertainty. But yeah.
No, I can think of one, just for context for everyone here. One time Austin and his counterpart then came to me and said, hey, we're about a week away and we need a conference room for like 10 people for maybe 2 weeks. And we need it the whole time. And because we're going to put sticky notes all up in the walls. Can you do that? And at least at our company, there's no way I can find a conference room that'll hold 10 people for 2 weeks straight.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just like, go sit in the hallway, dude. Like, I can't do this. And I called in some of my chips and my cards, and I wheeled and dealed, and with one of the gentlemen who's joined us on this call, and they did me a solid and gave me their huddle space for 2 weeks so that Austin could do one of his innovation projects and muck up their walls with his sticky notes.
So I will absolutely build on that example to also double down on the point of how much commonality we have between our roles, in the sense that my job has increasingly been successful over the past 3 years. The better relationships I have, the more influence I'm able to provide. And I have tried to do my best to build a ton of really trusting relationships inside the organization. And that has allowed me to pull the favors. I try not to do it often, but oftentimes when you're working in innovation, you have to have enough trust with the other person on the end of the table that they believe that I'm going to take them through something that is very uncomfortable in nature, because we are exploring something that they don't have familiarity with. And they have to trust that I'm there to help them. And I think that there is a lot of kind of parallels around working within organizations, and you need to be able to build those relationships so that when you do pull the card, you're not going to be looked at as like, get out of here, go work on a floor, right? You can't pull the card often, but when you do, you need to be able to back it up with good intention, good relationships, and follow-up thank yous. Like, I think we absolutely try to ensure that we are very respectful and gracious throughout our work. But yeah, I think
Phoenix calls that your ninja squad, the people you can rely on and call in, because you've built those relationships. So when you actually need them, you already got them, and you don't have to do the whole, hi, my name is, and I like you, and I hope you like me.
So I will say, to just further create a proof point for it, when I mentioned about 3 years ago, the team went through a bit of a restructure, and the way we were doing innovation changed a bit. And so to be totally candid, our small team was then, working in a completely different capacity. And there was, in my opinion, a perception of what innovation did before and where innovation was now was totally different. And so we knew it would be really important for us to get to know all of our peers, all of the business units, all of everyone in the organization as much as we could, from the highest level to the lowest level, so that we would have some grounding for why we would do what we do. We wanted to make sure that we understood our customer. We wanted to make sure we tried to solve the right problem. We wanted to make sure we applied our attention on the right areas of the business. And so it was critical for us to do this exercise of building relationships, because the ninja squad would have been zero had we just jumped into the business and said, bull in a china shop, we're just going to solve whatever problem we can. And that you'll get pushed out, right? So just to agree with, like, having that support crew is absolutely critical.
So when you went on that innovation roadshow, though, was it just like meet and greet coffee dates? Did you have a presentation about here's what innovation could potentially do for you? Like, I mean, what does that look like when your whole purpose is changed, or there's an org change or whatever, and you need to kind of let people know here's the new and shiny us?
So I'll say it in two ways. The first time around we did this, we tried to make it very much like open-ended conversation. We just want to get context on who you are, what you do, why you do it, what does your team look like, all that. Like, we just need to need to understand the business better, and it starts with you in the meeting. Secondarily motivated by the fact that what can we do to help you? And so we'll probably go into the conversation to understand what are your day-to-day problems, what are you trying to solve, so that when we come back to you, we're positioning and we're working on bringing forward value because it's relevant to the problem that you're trying to solve. And so there is absolutely, twofold motivation there. One was survival, but the other one was, thriving to make sure that we would be solving the right problems. But we absolutely, treated the organization as our customer, right? We had to understand who was our customer, what were their pain points, what was their day-to-day like. And we have been very intentional year over year to maintain those relationships. And actually, we create annual kind of versions of what has innovation been doing over the past year, because we know that we're not top of mind for everyone, but it is important for us to stay present within the organization and continually showcase the fact that we are trying to solve problems day in and day out.
Interesting. So there's a lot of people on this call who work at much smaller companies. They're my role, and it's a 30-person company, and they work for the CEOs, and their boss might tell them, hey, I need you to go figure this out. And if they're not used to doing innovation or even thinking that way, what are some of the tips you would tell someone, hey, if you're just chucked a problem and your boss says, solve it, what are some of the beginning things you would hope that person would do?
That's a great question. So I mean, fundamentally for everyone, I believe there is a ton of value in any role that if someone is throwing a problem your way, your job is to ensure that you clearly understand the problem and that you are going deep into making sure that they understand that you understand it the way they understand it, right? You need to have complete alignment around what is the problem we're trying to solve and what is being asked of me, and then move into a focus, okay, now how can I solve that problem? So that's when, I would say I would move through kind of the innovation process, but whatever process you want to apply to it. I think it's important to first start with understanding the problem and then communicating to whomever is is asking you to solve this. Here's what I think is the approach to solve that problem. I think that we need to first, do X, Y, and Z. Here's what I expect out of that. And here's where we'll generate outcomes at a certain date in the future. So I think that there's value in being able to communicate that approach, whether it's a big company or a small company. I think you have to first align on the problem that is being asked to solve, and then communicate and align on the approach for how you're going to solve it.
Okay, those are good tips. I mean, it's sometimes you got to go to the basics that way.
I really think it's just the basics, right?
Yeah. How do you decide? So, I mean, I know that you said you lead a lot of things and that sometimes you do external partnerships. How do you decide when, okay, here's a problem, I'm going to lead all of this? Because the partnership that we went through, I felt like some of it, almost all of it, you could have done. What did we really need them for? And then I saw, okay, this is where they really have some serious expertise. But how do you make that determination of, I think I can run the whole roadshow versus, okay, I'm going to partner?
It's a great question. And I, again, would probably frame it as two different answers. One is if I know the partner, vendor, tool, whatever is has more domain expertise in the problem, in the way of solving that problem than I do. And so I will absolutely lean on other people who, perhaps know that problem better than I would. The other thing is increasing perhaps the amount of scale that I can have to influence a project. So oftentimes, facilitating or doing one of these engagements takes many, many months to do. And I think that there is a lot of value in having a support partner to help orchestrate across all of the different parts of the business and making sure that you are doing it as quickly as possible, but also as thoughtfully as possible.
Okay, that makes sense. And how do you pick how much research do you do? How do you decide what partner to go with? It just seems like there's all these different innovation groups out there, because once I heard about the one we worked with, I started going down the rabbit hole of Google, and there's a zillion different groups that claim to be experts in innovation.
Yes.
How do you land on one you like? Was it more arbitrary and then you got to know them and you decided that they're good?
So I would say that I have increased my level of ability to vet different companies and different types of services the more knowledgeable I am about innovation principles and practices. So I read a lot. I try to, do my deep understanding of what is innovation so that I can ask good questions and vet those organizations that could help us. I would say that I have been lucky that I have found companies that perhaps are, skilled at solving the problem in a certain way. But I think that there is plenty of focus. Sorry, dog decided to bring me a plastic bottle.
Good old Tux.
Yeah, right. No, I've been lucky that I have solved problems, leveraging partners in different ways. But honestly, I would say that I have accumulated a tool belt of, a Rolodex of ways of solving problems. And so I actually was telling someone earlier that I feel like I have recently started collecting questions, because I find that people that ask really good questions actually generate even better solutions. And so I've actually started creating my own notepad version of really interesting questions. So I think of it the same way as different sets of tools, different sets of vendors, different types of partners. They'll typically specialize or be capable of doing something to a very high degree. And so my job is to try and make sure that I'm mentally orchestrating or architecting the way I try to synchronize all of those different innovation efforts across the board. I think that there's a value in trying to, immerse yourself in everything innovation and then making decisions. But at the same time, I can say that not every vendor we work with today, we have worked with more vendors that we don't work with today. So there's definitely times when we have tried out something because I knew that it would be of value to experiment with a vendor, with a tool, with a capability. And so that's just the nature of the business.
So now I got to ask, what's one or two of those good questions? Guys, to be transparent here, I came up with a list of stuff I wanted to talk about because I'm an over-preparer. Austin is a bit too, so I shared it with him. But I'm going rogue now, so if you don't want to share one of those really good questions, but I would love to hear at least one or two of them.
So I think and this is, not a new question in my Rolodex of questions, but one of the best questions in regards to innovation is how might we? And it's such a basic question, but it's how might we ... It just totally creates a mindset of possibility that helps the team think in such a more abundant mindset. And I think that that's really important when you're talking about innovation, is that you're trying to present things with such a, an opportunistic and a, I don't know if you've ever heard of, Second City is known for the yes and, where you're trying to build on each other's ideas. Well, I think kind of the most fundamental innovation question is how might we? So how might we explore that territory that you feel is uncertain? How might we, approach that problem that you think is really critical? Or how might we uncover which assumptions are most important to that uncertainty? How might we, you can just keep going down the road. but I think that it invites collaboration, it invites participation, and it also invites exploration. And I think that that's really important.
That's a good one. That's a good one. One thing I hear getting thrown around a lot, and I'm seeing it more and more, is this jobs to be theory. And it looks like there are novels written about. If you wouldn't mind giving us a brief little rundown of what does this mean? Because I would love your viewpoint, because I've done a bit on Google, but jobs to be done is a very complex thing, but it's also really simple.
Yeah, so jobs to be done was actually originated probably almost, 20, 30 years ago as a theory. And it was created, it was kind of co-created by a few gentlemen, but kind of the most, iconic thought leader was a gentleman named by Clayton Christensen. And he came up with this theory around the fact that, or the principle that customers, and bear with me as I say customers, it could be internal customers or external customers, but customers hire products and services to accomplish a job in their life. And it's like just a bunch of jargon when you think about it. But really the principle of jobs to be done is to think about a customer's pain point and a customer's problem in such a different lens. And what do I mean by that? Well, I'll give you an example. I drink tea pretty much every morning around 9 a.m. I hire tea to fulfill a job in my life. And the interesting thing is that that job can essentially be across 3 different dimensions. It can be a functional job, it can be an emotional job, or it can be a social job. And so when you're talking about uncovering a pain point or an opportunity space, we would typically try to go deep into understanding what are the jobs to be done for our customers. For me and tea specifically, I hire tea to make me awake, right? That is a very functional job that I hire tea to do for me. I also hire tea every morning at 9 a.m. because that provides me emotional stability, that I have a routine, that I am in control, that I do the same thing, that I am in my place, I'm in my order and everything. So emotionally, tea actually does more than just keep me awake, right? Like we all have our morning routines, we have our morning coffee or whatever. Oftentimes that's just out of a routine behavior that keeps you in your groove, right? And then finally, as a social job, we hire things to make us appear a certain way to our peers, right? Help me seem like someone who is ... And so I hire tea oftentimes because, especially when we were back in the office, to go grab a tea with someone, to go grab a coffee with someone. You are becoming, someone who is inviting and welcoming because you are going to have a conversation with them. So I might not, be thirsty for a tea. I might not need any, functional nature to it, or even it's out of my morning routine. But if someone says, hey, do you want to go grab a coffee? I might be hiring tea to help me appear, socially fitting in my life. And so when we're trying to think about an innovation challenge, we use this framework, we use this theory to help us go deep into thinking about, okay, what is our customer's pain point? And let's think about it in this type of way. Because sometimes a customer might say, this is my pain point. Well, then you could go one layer deeper and say, but why is that a pain point to them? Is it because they want to feel a certain way? They want to appear a certain way? Or because they need to be seen a certain way? And so you can kind of think about any problem or any way of, understanding who someone is with this lens, especially around how they hire products or services. Because that is a different way of positioning than how you solve the challenge. Because if it is a very significant functional jobs to be done, then you don't want to be trying to solve it with a social solution, right? Like you need to make sure that your solution is solving the problem that is actually most effective. And so going that one layer deeper around understanding your customer at least has helped our team really go to that next level way of generating solutions that are actually meeting their unmet needs.
Makes a lot of sense. I'm going to open this up for Q&A in just 1 second. What is your go-to tea?
Oh, I'm typically an English breakfast tea. I do float between brands. I'm not like a loyalist. I used to have, what was it? It was like a British tea that was really good. Yeah, but
Okay.
yeah, PG tips. Sorry.
PG tips. Yep.
Yeah.
That is a very British tea. Okay. Anyone have any questions for Austin? We have about a little over 10 minutes. Otherwise, Austin and I can keep talking innovation.
Yeah.
This is your window, rapidly closing window of opportunity.
I have a question for Austin.
Yes.
Hi, Austin. I'm Megan. I'm in Austin, Texas. And
Hi, Megan.
do you have any tips for if you're working with a team who might be a little bit more old school and kind of has that if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and try to nudge them along to be more innovative?
Well, I think that, it's always better, at least on my side of the table, when someone really feels the problem exists in their life and like really wants it solved, because then I can try to be a partner with them to help them uncover that solution. Obviously, I could, in any company walk around and say, that's a problem, I should solve it, right? But I think that it's somewhat presumptive of me to try and solve other people's problems that they don't feel like it's their problem yet. So oftentimes it's healthy to try to perhaps uncover why something is a problem and go deep into that customer discovery or that problem discovery mindset and present that case as an opportunity. So I absolutely have done this a few times where I'm trying to essentially present the problem as like, is this worth solving? And then you kind of have to have that open discussion around, I think that this is an interesting territory, but do you think that this is a problem we're solving?
That makes sense.
Brilliant. I'm going to pop in there. I've got a quick question for you. So Austin, first of all, thank you for giving us your time and intention today. I really, really appreciate it. One of the things you had mentioned actually during your talk was that good old yes and theory. So I'm maybe a little too old school and a little too in your face. So I think of yes and as the biggest bunch of bullshit I've ever encountered in my entire life. But I'm open to interpretations and other people's ideas around it. But really, I guess the question I have for you is, I find that it tends to genericize really sort of either crunchy ideas or hard discussions that need to be had, or even challenges to something that most people might see as mediocre. So I'm just curious,
Sure.
How does that work its way, or is there a way to actually employ it? Obviously, it's meant mainly around respect, but I still feel like it strips away a little bit of having those cringy conversations. So I'm just curious what your take on that is.
So I think, and it is a great point, honestly, and my job is to bring the right technique in at the right time to help solve the right problem. And yes and is a really productive technique when you're trying to generate creative solutions. You're trying to be, and it's divergent thinking, right? That is like, we are in exploration mode. But when we need to have like narrow down conversations and like really converge on the right solution, yes and isn't an appropriate tool. And so I think that there is a time and place to use something like yes and. I think that there is value in approaching conversations with the like, what could we do to solve this? To your point, I've been kind of trained in that yes and theory, and I think at times it is a little bit like, all right, but let's just get down to the brass tacks and solve the problem. But I do think that there is times when I'm trying to ensure that the group is thinking, let's build our ideas instead of shooting them down, right? Because who knows if like one idea might spark another idea, might spark another idea. And so I think that it is just ensuring that you know which tool is useful and which technique is useful at the right time. So I'm not a use it at all cost type person. I just think that it needs to be used thoughtfully.
A question, and this may be a bit more rhetorical than anything else, but let's say the challenge is that you have a closet or a desk that just it needs to be reorganized. It needs to be re-envisioned. Mm-hmm. And so you might hire someone to redesign something or come up with new ideas, when in fact, The actual answer is to purge, is to get rid of those 30 pairs of shoes,
Sure.
to eliminate redundancies, to become more efficient, to eliminate some of the paperwork or pulling reports.
I'm going to use this metaphor, by the way.
The system. Is that answer too easy?
No, I think that oftentimes, again, and that is like the exact type of question that I would ask when someone comes to me with a problem. Like, I've got this closet, I want to redesign it completely. I will ask, well, what does not having a closet look like, right? Like, that's the type of question that we need to like be comfortable with asking, because we might be trying to solve the wrong problem. And so it goes back to that point of ensuring that, okay, what is it that you're actually trying to do? Well, I'm trying to create more, like the individual might say, well, I need better access to my vacuum. Okay, well, why do you need better access to your vacuum? It's like, well, because I vacuum every day. Well, what if we put your vacuum over there? Do you need to then reorganize your entire closet if your vacuum is over there instead of there? Yeah, sure, that might solve the problem, and it might be as easy as that. So I think oftentimes I'm trying to go as deep into the problem space as possible so that I'm not trying to reorganize someone's closet when that actually doesn't solve the problem at hand. Metaphorically,
that's a great metaphor.
I don't know if I'm going to jump into the closet business, but it's
It's a really good metaphor. Parts of your job sound really, really fun. So I want to spin this for a second. What is the hard part of your job? Like, what is the part that sometimes is just like, today is not my good day?
I think that honestly, the hardest part of my job, and probably anybody's job, is miscommunication and misalignment. And I try to do my best to ensure that I am communicating, again, what I understand. Here's the facts that I have. Here's my intention. And I try to do my best to understand someone else's facts, their intentions. And if there is like misalignment there, I think that can be the biggest problem of doing innovation or doing any role, right? It's on that human to human, like, we need to be able to work together. And if we are off on our communication, then we might be in a non-starter, or there might be, other variables that shouldn't be in this room, in this closet.
Well, that's my last question. Does anyone else have anything they want to ask? We got about 6 more minutes before the end here.
I have a question.
Oh, let's go with Ro.
Okay.
Go with Ro, then Elliot. Yep.
Yes. Austin, have you ever been actually the one standing in the middle of innovating or solving a problem, where someone has turned to you and said, what you're bringing to me is causing me, I don't know, more angst, or what you're bringing to me is not exactly helping the situation? And how did you rectify, or how did you pivot from there?
Yeah.
It can't always be 100% on target, right?
So you're right. It can't always be 100%. The couple thoughts that come to mind is, one, I do try to make sure that I am iterating throughout the process so that we're not at the end of the engagement, we're not at the end of the project, and we are so far off base that we have that really tough, like, this isn't what I was expecting, right? Like, as long as someone is in seeing the kind of the iterations and are brought along the way, there is less risk in there being surprised at the end, right? Like, let's catch that type of, problem early and quickly. The other thought that comes to mind is I try to co-create. And that's like a whole nother principle of innovation, is trying to build solutions with your customers. And there is so much opportunity to essentially take that problem and go to your customer and say, help me solve our problem here, right? Because you're facing this problem, I'm facing this problem. How can we solve it together? And oftentimes, like, even if you're just using that word, like, I want to co-create this solution together, it will eliminate a lot of those, like, expectation that you're going to solve my problem 100% to my expectations. Like, getting them invested into solving that problem is typically a good idea. Obviously, it can't happen in every situation, but if it does need to be less of a participatory role, then I do try to keep them alongside as iteratively as possible. But I have definitely been caught like, late into something and it's not hitting. And I think that it is healthy and wise to be comfortable with going back an iteration so that you can try to reground and reset. And I do try to make sure that we don't get so far along the road that we can't go back. But I also want to make sure that that expectation is set at the beginning so that if we do get too far, we can always, take one step back so that we can move forward appropriately.
Thank you,
Elliot?
Austin. And Elliot.
Yeah, earlier you spoke of the value of the power of asking the right question that can sort of change the mental framework we bring to a conversation when we're looking to think differently about a problem. Are there other things that either as groups or as individuals we can do that might be in the moment to break ourselves out from whatever mindset we might have at the time to give us the opportunity to think more broadly about, a problem that might be a hand or an opportunity? What things can we do to create the right atmosphere for thinking?
So you kind of broke up there at the end. How I understood it is that you're asking, beyond asking good questions, what other kind of frameworks or mental models can you use to solve unique problems? Is that what you were saying, Elliot?
So actually, even more simple than that, how can we get ourselves in the moment in the right mental frame of mind?
Oh, okay.
Break outside of whatever box we might be in, just open our mind a bit as we approach a problem. The right atmosphere, the right question, things like that.
So two things. I do typically in projects try to do a bit of exploration and hypothesis setting. And so at the very beginning or at the onset, or even before we start doing any project work, I might assign pre-work or I might take on the pre-work myself to try and go explore as many other solutions for that problem as possible, so that I'm perhaps gaining a new sense of data points or inspiration outside of what I already know, right? Like it's sometimes hard to get creative outside of the thoughts that you already have. And so sometimes I'll assign some exploration work to try and help people think even more creatively by getting inspiration of other companies, other solutions, other whatever. The other thing is that I try to also have everyone lay out what are the big assumptions, what are the thoughts that you already have, and get those out on paper. Because I think that then that gives us a healthy starting point to acknowledge that we might have beliefs that are incorrect and or they might be correct. And so our job is to validate or disprove those assumptions as quickly as possible. And so I think just the exercise of exploration to ensure that you are bringing, a new level of thinking to the conversation is always helpful. And B, I think it's always great to have people go through the exercise of, what do you believe about this problem? Like, who do you think that customer actually is? And like Naomi mentioned this earlier, it's a good exercise for us to essentially say, here's what I think the solution could be, or here's what I think the problem is, before you even do any secondary level of work to it. So yeah, I don't know if that's a comprehensive answer, but those are the top of mind things.
Yeah, Austin had us read a couple of chapters from 2 different books when we were on our project together. And it definitely, you put on your little hat, you get in a different mind frame when you're kind of forced to think differently because of that. It was a good way to start a whole new way to think about how in that project, how we communicate with our customers. Let's just get you outside your head. Let's read these chapters, and then we'll all talk and figure out who our customer is and go through this process. It was a really great way to kick it off. So Austin, I want to thank you so much for joining us. This was a pleasure. We have met our full hour, and I appreciate your time today. I know you are about to have a busy few weeks. So thank you again for joining. Thank you, Phoenix, for being here and letting us have yet another Mastermind Fireside Chat. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Fantastic. Thank you.
You're so welcome.